good morning, depending on what area you're sitting in or what time zone you're in. Welcome to the Sharing Fire Behavior Practices and Lessons Learned Fire Season 2016. Before we get started, my name is Tammy Parkinson, and on the GoToMeeting or GoToWebinar, it's under Lisa Ailens's license. So you'll see her name in there, but it's actually me talking for Lisa. I'm going to go over some quick webinar protocol on just to give you guys an update as far as how we're going to be doing the questions and so on. So we are going to offer up closed captioning. We have to meet the 508 compliance, or for folks that tap into the webinar after we've hosted it, because we are going to record this and you are being recorded right now. The closed captioning will be captured. In addition to that, we need folks to, if you're asking a question, we need you to identify yourselves prior to speaking. Make sure you're speaking into the microphone and try not to speak over others. I have everybody muted at this point. When you can raise your hand within the GoToMeeting, and I'll show you that right here. You can raise your hand by here, or you can type a question in the question box, and Diane and I will moderate or will monitor those questions and ask them out. And I'm not sure why my screen is cropped, so I apologize for that. So you'll enter your questions here. Here's how you'll raise your hand. And then as you dialed into the webinar, hopefully you all put in your audio pin. That's unique ID for each individual so that we can mute or unmute you as needed. So again, we'll be asking questions at the end of each of the sessions. So you'll have Zeke, Carrie, and Ryan. And Diane and I will be moderating those. And then you can either raise your hand or type it in here and we'll moderate for you. Diane or Dan?
Good morning. This is Dan Mindar, and I wanted to welcome you all on behalf of the Advanced Fire Environment Learning Unit. We're always impressed with the interest and willingness of people to help with these webinars. In the past, we've hosted some workshops at various conferences. Last year, we hosted a webinar similar to this one, and we felt we were able to reach much more of the target audience. The webinar format has its limitations, we understand, but we're able to reach so many more people, so we feel like these webinars are worthwhile. Just a little background on the Advanced Fire Environment Learning Unit. We've undergone several name alterations over the past couple of years, so you may have noticed that, but the core group and the general mission has remained the same. We're now chartered NWCC, the Fire Environment Unit. And this is kind of a loose-knit group that shares a common goal to improve fire behavior assessments. And this also includes a major component of forecasting fire behavior, and that's the fire weather. We recognize that NWCG courses such as S495 and S590 provide only basic skills, and folks are expected to gain further knowledge, skills on the job, at the field or on actual fires. We also know that each fire is unique, and the knowledge gained on each fire may also be unique. And so our aim is to share that information that may be gained locally with the broader fire behavior community, and help improve the fire behavior forecasts and reduce that learning curve for analysts. The Advanced Fire Environment Learning Unit has plans to expand and perhaps tackle other related projects. Currently, we're working on some videos where we sat down with Mark Finney, the developer of FS Pro, and some of the other spatial fire behavior models, and discuss the intent of the program and its limitations, et cetera, et cetera. And we hope to have those videos out this coming spring. We understand that the topics we could cover in these types of webinars is limitless, and we received many good suggestions for topics. but we had to pare those down to those we could cover in the time that we have. So with that said, we hope to meet your expectations with this webinar this morning or afternoon, wherever you may be, in the limited time that we have. So with that, I'd like to introduce Diane Rao of the Wildfire Management Research Development Application. She'll be our moderator for this webinar. We'd like to thank her in advance for her time, talent, and efforts this morning. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Diane. You didn't come here to listen to me, so take it away, Diane.
Hey, Stan. Hi, everyone. I hope you can hear me okay. So thanks for joining the webinar today. One thing I want to mention, we're going to have 3 different distinguished speakers this afternoon, and between each speaker, we're going to have a slight pause just to enable some transition between the speakers. So if you hear some dead air for 5-10 seconds, it's just a transition period, so nothing's wrong on our end of things. Well, we'll go ahead and get started. With our first speaker today is Robert Zeal, and he's known as Zeke in most circles. He's a fire analyst for the Alaska Fire Science Consortium after working for 4 years at the Alaska Interagency Coordination Center with Predictive Services. Prior to that, he served 34 years as a forester and fire manager in the Great Lakes states. He's an NWCG qualified fire behavior analyst since 1994 and a long-term analyst since 2002. Zeke has presented several times before on these webinars and workshops and is an institution in the fire behavior community. Welcome, Zeke. You ready to take it?
Yeah, can you all hear me?
Nope, loud and clear.
Okay. Well, I'll go ahead and get started. I certainly appreciate the opportunity. I think sometimes folks in Alaska operate with a little chip on our shoulders, thinking that we don't get our fair share of attention, but certainly I think you folks pay good attention to us, and we find that it's worth our while to present to the whole group and the whole country, because we find analysts coming up to Alaska asked to do analysis up there, and certainly if we have some insights, we hope that they help. I might be offering an Alaska perspective on this, but my intent really is to encourage you to look for and to document ways that the analyses that are done in your area can become more consistent and more accurate over time. If you document that information, folks like myself that come from other parts of the country can take advantage of that and do the best job we can with that. In Alaska, we use both the Canadian system for fire danger rating and the WFDA spatial analysis tools for our fire behavior analysis. Given that sort of hybrid system, we're always looking for ways to take best advantage of both. And I think this discussion will suggest ways that our fire weather index outputs can inform, in fact, improve the analysis within WFDAs. So what I hope to accomplish here is to emphasize ways to improve both the accuracy and precision of the WFDAs analyses. I think I want to quickly review the basis for using CFFDRS in Alaska. I want to encourage you to take a look at the websites and the resources that have been put together to support that information, provide it to people from anywhere around the country. I'd like to highlight the utility of the various fuel moisture codes and danger rating indices for informing WFDAs analysis and inputs. I do have some additional references. They're certainly attached to the handout that I shared with Dan. If folks want it, I can share that at a later point. So why do we use the Canadian system? Well, first and foremost, because the system was developed in the boreal forest, which is where most of our fires burn in Alaska. But, when you think about it, it is probably the predominant fuel type in Alaska is one of the fuel types that they did much of their calibration work when they built the system. It is highly calibrated to this fuel type and the conditions that exist there, and we did good results trying to make those things match up. I would add that the system is a simple one. it takes much less data to support it. And when you think about Alaska, we have some data challenges. We have a smaller number of residents, we have a harsh environment, and therefore we have less funding for things like weather radar, landscape mapping, and weather observations. And all this leaves a pretty large gap in our system of operations. Well, a simple system like this that requires only one observation with 4 weather elements once a day makes it possible for us to use weather stations and weather networks that don't meet the NFDRS standard, that don't provide enough information to make those calculations. But I will point out in addition that there is a unique aspect to the system, and that is its duff moisture code, which is like a 360-hour time-lag fuel moisture. You think about that, it's sort of between the 100-hour and the 1,000-hour. And I think that it serves very well in a variety of ways when you're trying to characterize the fire season. So let's take a look at this graph to sort of demonstrate what I'm talking about. The orange line is the DMC average for the Upper Yukon Flats area in eastern Alaska. The green line is the average trend line for the BUI. If you look at the shaded bars, they represent the median MODIS counts for a 13-year period by week. And the gray background represents the sort of average weekly fire acreage burned from incident management status summaries. And you can see that all 4 of those things match up pretty well. That the BUI and the DMC actually peak when the MODIS detections and acreage burned peak, that it falls off when, in fact, those detections fall off and bounces back when there is secondary seasons of some sort. So, you know, the fact that all these data sets match up real well tells us that the DMC and the BUI associated with it do an excellent job of characterizing not only our average fire season, but our peak seasons. And these graphs here are just to point that out, that the individual line for each of these 5 peak years show that the MODIS counts, the bars, are highly associated when the BUIs are highly deviated from the average. When the BUIs are extremely high, we get our MODIS detections. In every one of these significant fire seasons, you can see that to be the case. So it really is a system that tells us when and how significant our days are and the growth events that would be associated with those. Alaska has used the Canadian system since 1992. We've been displaying information like this online for a number of years. And when I came to Alaska, they were looking to improve that system. I helped them find a contractor, Mesowest, helped us build a system. And we put it in place. It was in prototype form in 2015 when we had a large season and many analysts coming up to work with it. So there was some exposure that year. Certainly last year wasn't as significant a season, but the system has become operational, and we do find that it serves us very well in trying to learn about the situation that exists. First and foremost, there's a map display that shows the weather station elements, and you can show one weather element or one index or moisture code. It shows the gridded display as well as weather station displays in those areas. We have reference information, the zone areas and boundaries. We can show the lightning detections. We can show the MODIS and VIRS detections, sort of for fire intelligence. We can show where the active fires are to help you pinpoint where you are and what area you're interested in. But more importantly, when you click on one of those stations, it brings up some additional detail associated with it. You can look at a small summary graph to give you some context for the current conditions. It provides links to daily and hourly tables of weather elements and fire behavior indices. Additionally, you can look up the National Weather Service zone forecast for the area that weather station resides in. And over here on the right, we've built a fire behavior calculator that allows you to actually do some proofing of using different fuel types and the weather elements from that weather station. The tables are probably the bread and butter for many folks. You can see all the indices. You can see hourly tables, daily tables for a given station. But here you can see that we can look at a group of geographically arranged, through that we put the forecasts in context with the observations. We talk a lot about persistence, but it's not always easy to bring together what we saw yesterday and what we're forecasting for today or tomorrow. And I think that context is something that is an important way to evaluate the usefulness of your forecasts. I did mention the fire behavior calculator before, and I think it's a valuable tool because it makes it easy for anyone to make that forecast. The weather elements come in directly from the weather station. You can change the date and time to change that weather information that comes in. You can edit that information and then do the calculation, but ultimately it makes it very quick and easy to use real information from that weather station to come up with a number that makes some sense. We're all familiar with the value of graphing. But the graphs in our system are URL defined. In other words, you can configure something, you can bookmark it, and come back to it every time you want to look at it. You can mix stations, you can mix codes and indices, or you can mix both. And so you can have multiple graphs come up when you ask for it, and it produces a variety of useful historical context to the conditions as they exist today. So that's sort of where our system is at this point. There's a lot of information. Probably the analysts in this group are among the folks that would dive deeper into what's here than perhaps someone who is only generally interested in the conditions for today. But it's intended to provide the resources for a broad mix of users. What I'm talking about here today is that I think that we've demonstrated that the Fire Weather Index system and its outputs in Alaska and the Lake States can be used to adjust the fuel moisture inputs to these analyses that we find ourselves responsible for. I would argue that we can and should use it to adjust initial fuel moisture for the near-term fire behavior forecasts and the short-term fire behavior analyses that we do. I think that it's important to recognize that the live fuel moistures that we see coming into these analyses by default need adjustment, and we may have some tools that can help do it objectively. And finally, I think it's important to recognize that we frequently have to edit the ERC streams and forecasts that are used in FS Pro to carry the analysis forward. So let's just take a quick look at those fuel moisture codes and what's going on. You know, we've been seeing the Nelson fuel moistures in the 1 and 10 hour fuel moistures since near term and short term were made available on WFDS back in 2011. And what I see in the areas that I do analyses here in Alaska and back in the Lake States is that in fact, those fuel moistures are significantly higher, and I would argue behave more like a 10-hour fuel when compared to what it used to do. I think the growing season index in our sort of green landscapes, where the landscape is green through much of the growing season, doesn't cure out during the peak season. It produces high live fuel moistures. Those may be accurate in terms of that living vegetation, but it makes it hard for the model itself to operate when the fuel moistures are that high. I'll give you an example of the net fuel moistures. This is the Rex complex, June 22nd, north of Healy, just north of the Alaska range. The initial fuel moisture conditions were 5 and 6% for the 1 and 10. It had 2 days of conditioning, and the conditioned fuel moistures raised significantly. They were 1 hour 8 to 11%, and the 10 hours were anywhere from 12 to 15% generally. So it has a significant impact on the fuel moistures that go into analyses in these parts of the country, actually raising them significantly. You know, at the same time, paying attention to the fine fuel moisture code, we see that those fuel moistures were, in fact, much lower. 10-hour fuel moisture might have been 7 to 8%. And the 1 hour, if you wanted to infer that, could be even lower than that. We can use, actually, the fine fuel moisture code to calculate those fuel moistures. And in fact, we can see that a fine fuel moisture code of 90 suggests that it might be an 11% fuel moisture. I looked at the stick fuel moistures for a number of years in Michigan and compared those to FFMCs, and for unshaded fuels, it might be as much as 2% lower. So we can actually use those fuel moisture codes to adjust those fuel moistures. Further, I would suggest that it would be interesting to look at the grass fuel moisture code that's been created in Ontario. It seems to match what we typically used to use in our fuel moisture inputs to the Behave model on the dry days, and matches the Nelson fuel moisture at nighttime and on wetter periods. The Duff Moisture code, I think, does a pretty good job of estimating that 360-hour fuel moisture. You can see that it's intermediate between the 100-hour and 1,000-hour fuel moistures in the NFDRS system. The interesting thing is that it being an open-ended code and continuing to rise during dry periods, it actually had lower moistures than either hundreds or 1,000 hours did during these two peak burn periods. But I wanted to see if it could help us identify and peg our live fuel moistures. And if you look here, during the highest peak burning periods during the 2015 season, the herbaceous fuel moisture using the new 2016 NFDRS was saying it was between 150 and 240%. At the same time, people were putting numbers like 30, 50, and 75% into their analyses to get the fire behavior to match what was observing. And in fact, the Duff Moisture Code, when converted to a moisture percent, did a pretty good job of pegging. There's a graph that allows you to make that conversion quickly and easily, and I've included that in my handout for folks to use. I think the last thing I want to highlight is, in fact, that the trends that we see seasonally, as I mentioned before, for the BUI and the DMC, do a pretty good job of matching when our growth occurs and when the lulls exist. The ERC, unlike that, actually shows that in this example, that the ERC is falling to the 60th percentile burnable threshold just as the season is getting going, and in fact continues to fall after that. I've done some analyses to suggest that the combination of FFMC and BUI can in fact tell us when we meet thresholds for burning conditions, and it continues to demonstrate increased amount of burning as those values rise. I built a sort of chart to encourage folks to make adjustments to the ERC streams and forecasts based on those FFMC and BUI values, either observed or forecasted, and they can help you put those ERC values in places that can improve our analyses. Using that information, I was actually able to develop a climatology, suggest that up there where the landscape is green, where you need the more significant kinds of weather events to get fires going, that we don't have burnable conditions 7 days a week. They're more like 2 to 3 to perhaps 4 days a week under the most extreme scenarios. We have tools, I believe, that can help us pick individual days as perhaps interrupted from significant growth, and would encourage folks to use that information as well. So we talk about actually perhaps saying a particular day can't be burned, or in fact reducing the number of burnable days in the climatology associated with an FS Pro analysis. Finally, I'll say that that behavior tool on the website and some of the manual tools that we have provide some pretty good assessments of the kinds of fire behavior that are possible. And using that to calibrate the results that you get in your analyses can help you come up with the best results possible. So with that, I'll close it out, offer some questions. If there's a minute or two afterwards, I have some references that I'd suggest, but certainly those are attached to the handout that I gave there.
Great. Thank you, Zeke, so much. Does anybody out there have any questions for Zeke? Right now, it's an open floor. You can type them in, and Tammy or myself can pick them up, or you can vocalize them right now if you choose.
This is Dan Mindar. Zeke, I did have a question for you. Those were handy little conversion tables. Are those available on the website, or is that something we have to have hard copy?
I actually have been moving towards making it available as a resource that can be readily downloaded. I will move it forward here to this page that the Alaska Fire Science Consortium sponsors a fire modeling guides products page, and I'm going to put the references together and make it easy to download them here.
Okay, yeah, that's great. Just wondering how how difficult it is for an analyst to get a hold of that information.
Yeah, the consortium's done a pretty good job of putting a wide range of products together here for folks to use and look.
Zeke, this is Kerry.
Yeah.
Thanks for your presentation. Following up on what Dan said, I mean, it's quite a lot of good information that you just gave us. Are you working on any documentation that will help folks kind of slow down the pace and put a little more thoughtfulness into how they can use this information?
Well, I think that that would be my hope with what the reference would be online. I do think that it is a foreign language in many respects, and that until you get a chance to actually dig in a little bit, you might not really understand how you might use that. I would encourage folks to see, I've got all my advertisements here, to actually consider going online. There's the Frames online course system where you go for the 495 course or the 590 course, among others. There resides there a course, introductory sort of reference course on CFFDRS and the way it's used in the U.S., how it compares to U.S. tools. And I think that might be a good way to get started for anyone that just wants a little more background on the Canadian system and how it's used in the Alaska and the Lake State.
That's what I'd be looking for. Thank you.
Thanks, Kerry. Brenda Wilmore has a question for us. Brenda, you ready?
I am. Can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay. Well, first of all, I'd just like to say thanks, Zeke. This is something that has been needed for several years, so this is very exciting. And then the other question I would have is, has the Canadian group come up with anything that's similar to FS Pro? I think they do have something kind of near-termish, short-termish, but just curious on that end.
So they have a basic spatial model like the U.S. system does. They call it Prometheus, whereas the U.S. called it Farsight and now FlamMap. And they've produced a number of different tools. They have a tool that's much like the burn probability assessment in the FlamMap, and they are and have demonstrated a tool more like the FS Pro, where it's an individual fire with multiple growth scenarios. I think they are actually ahead of us in some ways, using ensemble forecasting to evaluate, what's possible in the weather going forward. Right now, we pretty much, in our 7-day outlooks for the predictive service areas and in a variety of places, use single weather scenarios. FS Pro has that multiple scenario system in it, but I think that the ensemble weather forecasting could take that even further.
Right, thanks.
Thanks for your question, Brenda. Next up, we have a question from Tim Cook. Tim, you ready?
Just a moment. Yeah, you can just evaluate my question. I submitted online. Did you hear that?
No, I can't.
Yes.
I can't see it. No, I
Dan,
can't
do you want me to
see
read
the
it?
question. Yeah.
Great potential calibration tools seems like a great tool. I would need a handout to access and look at this for ERC bins and WUPDAs. Please help get this out. I like the data that showed not every day is a big fire day and ebbs and flows throughout a week. And then missed getting the Frames websites. We can certainly send out the links to the Frames website post webinar if you'd like, if that would be helpful for the other attendees.
Yes, I'd certainly share that more specifically, and then in an email, and then you could forward that on. Tim, I appreciate your comment about this. I didn't initially, when I started looking at the calibration of the FWI system, think that something like this would come out of it. But I was really surprised using MODIS detections and the FWI indices at the nearest weather stations on those days. I was able to come up with a pretty good indication of the thresholds for active fire days. And once I could do that, I could use those indices, see how frequently they occurred and what their periodicity was. It's a pretty impressive thing to see that sort of episodic nature of fire in these green communities like Alaska and the Lake States have.
Very good. Thank you for your question and comments, Tim. We appreciate it. So next up is CJ Glester. I see you have a question about can you get the process used to replicate those thresholds locally?
So I do think Alaska is somewhat unique, that we have many MODIS detections. Over a 13 or 15-year period now, we have over 225,000 of them spread across a large area, and they're highly correlated with actual acreage burn because we don't suppress most of those fires. Whether you use MODIS detections or you use your fire occurrence database and enhance it by trying to identify the days when fires actually grew in your local area, I think relating them to the local weather station and beginning to look at whether or not you can find those thresholds is an important step. It's not a difficult process. It's very similar to what's in Fire Family Plus. The only problem is in Fire Family Plus, you have to associate every fire with the weather on the day that it started, not the numbers of days that it grew.
Okay, very good. It looks like the questions for this segment are wrapped up. Any last questions or comments before we move on?
Do I need to pass it back to you, Diane, or to someone, or can you grab it?
We'll grab it.
You know what? Yep, Tammy will grab it. And right now, since this portion of the webinar is concluded, we're going to take a quick 5-minute break before Carrie Newman comes on as our second presenter. So It is 11:35 right now, so let's plan on everyone being back here at 11:40. Go get yourself a cup of coffee or have a bio break, and we'll see you in 5 minutes. It's 11:40, so let's go ahead and get started again. So our second presenter today is going to be Kerry Newman. He's going to talk about using IROS observations and alternative NWS point forecast in near-term fire behavior. So Kerry Newman is the fire planner on the San Juan National Forest in southern Colorado. He's a qualified long-term fire analyst who recently used some different methodologies for modeling fire behavior while working on the Brannis Fire in California this past season. Working with geospatial fire behavior models for more than a decade, he has learned that in spite of model limitations or inferior data, there are often alternative methodologies that can be used to improve modeled results. Kerry has also presented at our events before and has been a pioneer in exploring new approaches to unique problems in fire behavior modeling. Welcome, Kerry. Are you ready to take it?
Yes, thank you, Diane. You made that up, didn't you? No, Zeke is the pioneer. Zeke is the pioneer, and he's a tough act to follow. He really is. But I hope I can give everybody here some information that'll be useful to them at some point in the future. I'm going to talk today about some of the challenges that I encountered while I was assigned on the Brannis Fire in California in early mid-August 2016. And looking at the list of attendees, there's a number of folks that I recognize that probably also were assigned to the Brannis Fire at some point. Jennifer Anderson is attending, and she was there working side by side with me. So I'd like to give her some credit also for the work that we did together. She was great to work with. And also Ryan Walbron, who was the incident meteorologist that was assigned while I was there and is presenting also today, was so instrumental in helping me wrap my mind around the weather along the coast of California, the central coast there, south of Monterey. So thanks, Ryan. Glad you're here. Also, Zeke was there also. And so, you know, there's a number of us here today that definitely had some challenges in trying to forecast what the Brannis Fire was going to do. So a little background. The Brannis Fire was ignited on July 22nd of this year in a CAL FIRE state response area. So initial response by CAL FIRE, immediately mobile Type 1 CAL FIRE team. But it didn't take but a few days for the fire to spread onto the Los Padres National Forest and then subsequently into the Ventano Wilderness. So pretty early on they set up a unified command which worked together pretty well through the duration of their assignment. The fire was declared 100% contained on October 12th of this month, or last month now. And the last infrared that showed any spread put the size at 132,000 plus acres. Up until the time of containment, the fire had burned 82 days. I think there were 3 or 4 Type 1 teams, at least 1 Type 2 team. I actually did 2 assignments there, one early on and then one in late September. And this was one of the most challenging fires that I've ever had the opportunity to work with. And because of the challenges it presented, it really forced us into looking at some alternative approaches to modeling fire behavior. So while we were there, it was all about the marine layer. This is where the fire was in early August, and what you see is actually infrared imagery, or the NIROPS picked up one night, which shows an example of the marine layer intrusion, and this would have been overnight. This was a daily occurrence. The marine layer would move in the evening, would set in overnight and affect fire behavior where it influenced coastal and valley areas, and then it would move out back onto the ocean sometime midday, early afternoon, and it was caused by high pressure at the surface. And I'm not a meteorologist. Ryan could explain this a lot better than I could, but it varied depending on how high the pressure was, between 1,000 and 3,000 feet, and it was always an influence on fire spread. The high pressure caused an onshore flow, which brought the marine layer onshore every day, and made it extremely difficult to model fire behavior where the marine layer was present. So this is a fairly early morning photograph, but you can see the marine layer is right at about 1,000 feet there. This is on a ridge top, and you're actually looking out across the marine layer. I'm not sure which direction the photo is looking, but this was an everyday sight for the people that were working the lines up on the ridges. This is another shot looking east. Obviously, it's sunrise on the 3rd of August, and not sure where the picture was taken. It may be looking out across the Carmel Valley and Salinas Valley over to the range to the east of the Salinas Valley, or it may be on the coastal ridge looking across the Ventana Wilderness, but you can see that it's pretty well filled in. This is at about 6 o'clock in the early evening on the 4th, and while this isn't all moisture from the marine layer, there's quite a bit of smoke in there, but you can see that it's very well defined where the top of the inversion is, and it really turns the world upside down. Lapse rates are inverted, temperatures are much lower at lower elevations, and our relative humidities are much higher. At higher elevations, you get the highest temperatures and the lowest relative humidities. This is about afternoon as the marine layer is beginning to back off towards the coast. This would be looking to the northwest, and the marine layer off to the left there is moving back down towards the coast. And you can see they're actually burning out down in the bottom of the canyon there. So what we're looking at here is a DEM that gradiate elevation, and where it's yellow, orange, and red are elevations above 2,000 feet, and green is below 2,000 feet. Again, looking at that NIROPS image of what they term cloud cover, but it's really the marine layer. You can see in a lot of places it correlates pretty well to about the 2,000 foot level in this particular instance. And as I mentioned earlier, depending on the pressure, high pressure, it would either flatten it down below 2,000 feet, or if the pressure was lower, it would allow the marine layer to rise up. But we began to notice pretty early on that the fire was really actually spreading along the ridge tops above 2,000 feet, or above the marine layer. That's what caused us to put together this DEM map, because we wanted to be able to kind of look at where we thought the fire was going to spread. In this short example, over two days of spread, that you can see that the fire is wanting to walk along the ridges up above the marine layer. So we had some permanent rods that we could work with in modeling and WFDS fire behavior. We were doing FS Pro as part of the strategic plan that we were working on, but generally on an almost daily basis we were running near-term fire behavior to help inform how we're implementing strategic plan and the management action points. So as you know, in near-term fire behavior, you have one choice of a weather station that's going to influence both fuel moistures and fuel moisture conditioning and forecast wind speeds, direction, and RH and temperatures as they relate to fuel moisture conditioning throughout the projection period. So we really only had 3 stations to choose from. We had the Big Sur ROS, which was over near the coast and almost always in the marine layer. We had the Hastings ROS, which was over in Upper Carmel River Valley, which was oftentimes influenced by the marine layer. And then we had the Arroyo Seco ROS, which is over on Arroyo Seco, down in the bottom of the canyon. So we had to make some choices about which weather stations not only to use for near-term fire behavior, but also for FS Pro. If we take a look at each one individually, the Big Sur ROS is at 354 feet, and it's down in the marine layer here. If we look at a windrows from Big Sur, you can see that it has a pretty good variety of wind directions, but the wind speeds are fairly low. And this is looking at both 10-minute average winds and gusts. If you look at the Hastings ROS, which is over in the Carmel Valley here, the thing that came out right away was the wind climatology for Hastings ROS is very much terrain driven. You can see over a 1-month period that the winds are almost, majority of the winds are out of the northwest and then west, but very little wind of any other direction. If you look at the Arroyo Seco ROS, over here in Arroyo Seco Canyon, you can see also that it's very much terrain-dominated winds, generally out of the east, which would be up valley, up canyon winds. So our choices for winds were very limited. In fact, there were no good choices for winds. So what we had to look at next was which stations might be good for temperature and relative humidity that would affect fuel moisture conditioning. We had a variety of IROS spread out around the fire, and Ryan was proud to mention that the Brannis Fire at one point tied the record for the most incident ROS that were deployed on a fire with the Whitewater Baldy Fire down on the Gila some years back. But we had quite a variety of ROS that we could look at to compare actual observations in areas of interest to us with observations at the stations and make some comparisons and some judgments as to which stations might be better to use. We'll look at an example, a comparison example between the Big Sur IROS, which was down near Highway 1 at 354 feet, and the H3 IROS, which was up on the North Coast Ridge here at 2,623 feet, which was generally going to be above the marine layer 24 hours a day. We were beginning to see fire movement coming down into the Big Sur Canyon here, and so this area in here became our focal point for looking at predicted fire spread. You can see clearly that the Big Sur permanent ROS is going to be influenced by the marine layer, and the H3 ROS is going to be less influenced, if not influenced at all. So we can go to MesoWest and compare some observations between the Big Sur ROS and the H3 IROS, which are these two over here. We're going to move forward ahead in time up to the 16th of August and look at some observations in the previous 24 hours. So if you look over here at the Big Sur IROS, You can see the relative humidity gets up near 100% for quite a long period during the preceding 24-hour period prior to 12 o'clock local time. Temperature barely gets up to above 70 degrees and then drops down to nearly freezing in this period over the 24 hours. Looking at the H3 IRAS, you can see that it's much warmer up there. You know, it's getting up above 80 in the afternoon and barely dropping down to 70 overnight. And the relative humidity stays pretty rock bottom all the way through the period, with a maximum in the afternoon actually about 20% and a minimum down below 10% early in the morning. And we saw this sort of pattern on the ridgetop where the lowest relative humidities would be in the early morning. Looking at the winds, you can see that there are a variety of winds at Big Sur in the afternoons where we would expect them to be highest. They were generally out of the southwest with an occasional observation in a different direction. At H3 IRAS, which takes an observation every 15 minutes, you can see that they were generally more westerly, southwesterly in the afternoon and coming out of the morning and into the early afternoon. Look at the comparison with the Hastings RAWs with H3. You can see that it's a little bit more moderate in temperature swings. It gets up above 80 and drops down a little bit below 70 in the previous 24 hours. The relative humidity is much less of an extreme trend as we saw over at Big Sur, but it does peak pretty high at 50% in the afternoon, and as we see a minimum again early in the morning. Again, comparing it with H3, it's a little bit better correlation, but we were seeing much more active fire behavior at the ridgetops, which was being influenced by generally low relative humidities over the 24-hour period and higher temperatures. If we look at winds, you can see that classic Hastings pattern of northwest westerly dominance, which doesn't match up with what the IRAS is showing up on the ridgetop over there. If we look at Arroyo Seco RAWs, we can see even down in the valley bottom it has extreme differences in relative humidity and pretty extreme differences in temperature. Much different than the IRAS up on the ridge. So, you know, at this point we're thinking Hastings is probably the best bet for starters. Again, with looking at Arroyo Seco winds, you can see that dominant up canyon, up valley effect as compared to H3. We can make a couple other quick comparisons. This is the Hastings RAWs at 1,885 feet, and the Blue Rock RAWs up at 2,600 feet, which is oftentimes going to be above the marine layer. A little better correlation between Blue Rock and Hastings, as you can see here. Blue Rock gets a little bit higher humidities in the afternoon than H3, way over to the west on the north coast ridge. Blue Rock RAWs winds are completely different than the Hastings winds. Another quick comparison between Arroyo Seco and Choose Ridge. Choose Ridge was the highest IRAS that we had, up at 4,800 feet, and Arroyo Seco way down in the bottom of the canyon there. We also will look at Tasahara RAWs, which was down at Tasahara Hot Springs, down in the canyon bottom there. Again, Arroyo Seco with that wild swing in relative humidity overnight and temperatures as well. Choose Ridge is much more similar to H3, where you have much less fluctuation in temperature and relatively low humidities for the 24-hour period. The lowest humidity in this particular period was around midnight. The Arroyo Seco winds and the Choose Ridge winds, which were much more variable in direction in the afternoon. And then looking at Tassajara RAWs, Tassajara was a pretty hot spot down there. It got oftentimes above 100 degrees down in the bottom, as well as down in Arroyo Seco, but it had much less fluctuation in relative humidity. Winds are a little bit more similar to Arroyo Seco because they're terrain dominated, where the RAWs was located in the bottom down by Tassajara Hot Springs. So we made some choice early on that neither Big Sur or Arroyo Seco were going to be representative weather stations for modeling near-term or FS Pro for that matter, and that we would begin with the Hastings RAWs. Looking at H3, Blue Rock, and Choose Ridge, you can see that they're all higher temperatures throughout the period and lower relative humidities, and that Hastings was going to be the best choice initially. So we'll go ahead and set up a run. We'll look at this August 15th infrared, and the concern, they were doing burnout operations along the North Coast Ridge here, and the concern was whether the fires are going to continue to move to the south and outpace their burnout operations, particularly in this area here. So we wanted to do we'll look at a 3-day near-term projection. We'll look at setting up a 3-day near-term projection in this area here. So using Hastings initially, well, I'm sorry, this is Big Sur. Looking at the hourly records for Big Sur for the 16th with an ignition time of 1300, you can see really high relative humidities, fairly low temperatures, and somewhat moderate wind speeds, but you can see here we're not going to get very good fuel moisture conditioning at all, and conditions are very dry up on top of the ridges. So same condition with Arroyo Seco here, so those are not good choices. So we want to look at Hastings, and we see fairly low relative humidities forecast out beginning after 1300 on the 16th. But again, we're seeing that west-northwest wind component. In this, using Hastings for the 17th, RHs are a little higher. Winds are going to be to the west. Similarly on the 18th, so we're going to go with Hastings here. But if we only had a point forecast for H3 IRAWs like we do for Hastings, so what can we do? Well, we found a trick. And this is real time right now with the San Francisco Monterey forecast office page. But you actually click here and bring up a forecast grid. So we're in the vicinity of Big Sur there, but our H3 RAWs is probably right about there. So we're in a grid that's fairly close to where the H3 RAWs is, and you can notice the elevation here is at 2,388 feet. We could poke around and find maybe a grid that had a little bit better elevation representation, but what we're able to do here is go over and grab the tabular forecast. Now this is for today, but you can select out of this tabular forecast what you want to look at. Particularly, we're going to look at temperature, relative humidity, surface wind, and also 20-foot wind over here. And we could take that grid, which at 2,549 feet is pretty representative of where the H3 IROS was. And we could actually, and this is a grid from the 16th of August, we could actually plug those numbers in for 20-foot wind speed, which you see here is quite a bit lower than the Hastings forecast, but we were also very interested in the wind direction, so we could plug those numbers in too. Now it's interesting here that relative humidities forecast up at the in that grid are actually quite a bit higher than the forecast relative humidities here. But what we often did was we'd go ahead and populate the temperature and relative humidity for the entire 24 hours, the hourly records, for all of the days of the near-term run, as well as the wind speed and direction during the burning period that we had selected. And we would actually go back then and look at the H3 IROS observations and use the temperature and relative humidity and sometimes sky cover going back 24 hours in the hourly record. So if in this case it would have been for the 15th, to get a little bit better fuel moisture conditioning. So in a nutshell, that's the process we used, but it's just the tip of the iceberg. We also had to deal with burn periods, which was extremely challenging. And Tim Chavis, the F-band with CAL FIRE 4 team that was already there when we arrived, had clued us in that there's two burning periods. There's one early in the morning and one in the afternoon. So we actually had to set up some near-term runs, which were 3-day near-term runs with 6 burning periods. Thank you, Tim. I know you're out there. Landscape adjustments, huge. The Brannis Fire burned in an area where there have been 4 large fires over the past 40 years. Fuel moistures, and perhaps Zeke's system would have helped us with fuel moistures. Spotting, local knowledge, it was tough. It was a big challenge. So that's it, folks. Happy to entertain questions or discussion.
We haven't seen any come through the questions feature in GoToMeeting, but there's got to be something out there.
Hey, Carrie, this is Dan Mindar. Not so much a question, it's a statement, but that process can also be useful if you've got some missing weather data or such as a means to go get some weather data to populate those fields.
Absolutely.
Hey, Carrie, this is Diane. On any one time, how many LTANs did you have assigned? And were you modeling individual portions of the fire separately, or it must have been interesting just trying to coordinate the analysis effort?
Well, to answer your first question, for the time that I was assigned, it was Jennifer Anderson and I, but we also had Ryan Walbrun was there as the IMET, a huge resource, and Tim Chavis and John Hagee from CAL FIRE there as F-bands, and together, and Ryan had a trainee also, but together we oftentimes worked as a team to try and sort all of this stuff out. It was never an individual effort on anybody's part, and there was always a different focus on where fire movement was going to be because it was such a large fire. While we were there, the focus became over on the North Coast Ridge, over in this area here, because there was a potential for it to threaten Big Sur, which ultimately it did. Now, other folks that came in afterwards, Rob Beery and Zeke were there for quite a while. Dan Dan was even there. You know, the focus shifted over to other areas of the fire. So having those IRAs in different locations, representative locations on the fire, was pretty important to be able to judge how the forecast and conditions were different, where the concern for fire movement was, as opposed to the forecast that we were getting out of near term.
Okay. Well, that must have spurred some thought, because now we have a slew of questions. So Rich McCrae, he has 2 questions for us. One, did you see much correlation between aspect west to southwest and major fire spread? And second, did you use a fuel stick on the IRAs, and if so, was it helpful?
To the first question, west and southwest aspects, this fire was in a much, much different environment than any of us are used to working in the interior west, where it was not so much a question of aspect, but it was more a question of alignment, and that alignment, alignment with predominant winds, and the predominant winds varied across the fire. So you could get, generally, as you can see, ultimately the fire spread to the southeast. So general movement was almost always to the in a southerly direction. So if you had alignment on a north aspect, you'd see movement on that slope.
And how about the fuel stick?
Oh, the fuel stick. To be honest with you, Rich, what we were paying attention to was we did a lot. Zeke, here's something that you didn't know. We had a incident over in training where we did a lot of experimentation and a lot of short-term and basic, and we were paying real close attention to 1 and 10-hour fuel moistures. Fuel moistures were generally rock bottom everywhere above the marine layer.
Okay. Let's see our next question by Boyd Levita. What was the purpose for choosing the grid forecast point associated with the IROD site?
Well, we didn't have to, but because we ran into a challenge with fuel moisture conditioning, depending on, well, obviously, we wanted to pick a grid that correlated to some observations that we could look at to go backwards 24 hours at least to try to get some better fuel moisture conditioning leading up to the ignition time. So we generally tried to go with gridded forecast, point forecasts that correlated to some observations that we had.
Okay, thanks. Let's see, we have a question from Ashley Sykes. What weather data did you use for FS Pro and why?
Well, we generally used Hastings for FS Pro as the fire began to move further to the south. I believe some of the analysts that were later on may have used Arroyo Seco also. Hastings was, of the 3, Hastings was the best one to use for ERC classes, but it was terrible for winds, as they all were. So we generally just stuck with Hastings for ERC classes and winds. We made some adjustments to live fuel moistures. But FS Pro was a tough one, and I don't know how valuable it was.
Okay. Next question. Elise Bone. With the modified weather inputs, how well do the near-term and FS Pro runs match actual fire behavior and growth?
Well, the problem was that when you apply forecast observations to a point above the marine layer and the fire moves down below the marine layer, which it frequently did, they no longer become valid. So what we would see was that probably for the first 2 days, the near-term projections would match up reasonably well. But if the fire moved down into, say, Big Sur Canyon here and down into the marine layer, it would slow down and the near-term projection would outpace it. We also had times when later on in the 4-day period the fire moved a lot further than the near-term projection showed. But we found out early on that it was much easier to over project than it was to under project.
Okay, Boyd has another question. Did you ever get to a point where you had some confidence in the modeled run?
Yeah, back on the 7th of August, when the concern was whether or not to fire out along the north coast ridge down in here, we did a projection which showed that the fire would come over the ridge and down towards Highway 1 here, which it ultimately did.
Okay, next question from Risa Lang Navarro. Were there any other weather stations that might be used, say from DOT or other agencies outside the National Weather Service and IROD? They may not have had all the components needed, but could there have been some components that were used?
Well, of course, we only had the 3 weather stations available to us in WFDS, Big Sur, Hastings, and Arroyo Seco. We did look at some stations over on the other side of the Salinas Valley here, which were much further inland and drier, and had been used, according to Ryan, on the complex that was there in 2008. But as far as using observations, we had such a good variety of IRODs, there really wasn't any need to look any further, at least for near term and basic and short term, because we only needed to go back 7 days to get fuel moisture conditioning.
Very good. Tim Klukas has a question. For fire danger rating, is California requesting more permanent ROD stations to be placed in different locations? It seems like this process would point to fire business and fire danger needs. Good technique to adapt and overcome.
I can't answer that for Southern California, South Ops, but I think probably they've got the best they have that they can work with in this northern part of the Los Padres, because so much of this area here is all in the Ventana wilderness. You know, I might make a recommendation that you know, they maybe put a permanent ROS up on the ridge to the west of or east of Carmel Valley, but you know, that's not agency land up there, so I think their choices are limited.
Okay, we have 2 final questions from Rich McRae. Was the IMET able to forecast how far inland and how deep the marine version was each day? We'll start with that one.
Ryan did an excellent job. I mean, the guy's from Monterey. He lives in this country all the time. I mean, if you needed an IMET on a fire like this, Ryan was the one you wanted.
Good to know. We also have, how did you interact with the IMET as far as briefings on FS Pro or near term?
Ryan was a busy guy. Of course, he was producing his forecast for an immense area. I think at one point this fire had 3 zones, 5 branches, and upwards of 26 divisions. So the F-bands and the IMETs had a huge job to try and distill everything down into a briefing that could be provided that was relevant to people in a widely diverse area. So it was kind of difficult sometimes to corner Ryan and say, hey Ryan, what do you think about this forecast that's coming up in WFDS here? And so we just kind of went rogue and came up with our own. We would talk to Ryan about it. He'd say, yeah, that's a great approach.
Okay, and the last question is, what was the effect of the previous fire's footprint?
The effect was that vegetation has been changed immensely over the years. We had the marble cone in 1977, the Kirk complex in 1999, and the Indians fire, which it never burned into, and then the Basin complex in 2008. So what you saw was that while there was still some timber left down in the canyon and valley bottoms, most of the ridges have been converted to brush. And from a landscape perspective, even Landfire 2012 hadn't grown the brush to the point to where it was, so we had to make some conversions to show that brush had matured over time.
Great, thank you, Carrie. Those were all excellent questions. Thanks to everyone for contributing. With that, we'll go ahead and close out Carrie's segment of the webinar, and we'll have a few moments of silence as we prepare for the next speaker, who is Brian Wilmore. Brian Wilmore is the Fire Weather Program Leader and Incident Meteorologist for the National Weather Service Office in Monterey, California since 2003. He received his degree in Atmospheric and Oceanic Sciences from the University of Wisconsin in 1996. And currently he's on the teaching cadre for S590, the course taught at NAFRI in Tucson. And to date, he has worked as an incident meteorologist on over 40 wildfires in the western U.S. Welcome, Ryan.
Okay, hello, and can everybody hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay, I'll assume that, yes. Okay, great. So, are you guys looking at my screen right now too, is that correct?
We see it now.
Okay, all right. So first of all, thanks from the Weather Service and myself for letting me be on this call. And I want to point out right away that it was kind of by dumb luck that Zeke and Carrie and I all got lined up. I was unaware of this until yesterday. So I did not pay Carrie to say all that stuff. But it's a great opportunity to speak to this group of people from reading the the initial call out for the different technical specialists and IMETs and LTANs. And I think it's a cool opportunity for us to kind of engage in a discussion or conversation. So I don't have any formal slides. I wanted to do it as more of a talking point, and I'm not aware of who everybody is that's on the call. From what I can tell, there's about 79 people, and I got to assume there's a lot of people from other parts of the country that don't care about California or Alaska. So I don't want it to become necessarily too Brannis centric. Although I think it was an interesting wildfire this year, and I know the initial call out by Dan talked about how each season there's fires that go on in different parts of the country where we get a whole bunch of analysts who all kind of cycle through. And I think we had a lot of F-fans and L-fans and other technical specialists that came through the Brannis, but I know there was the Pioneer Fire outside of Boise, and I think it was the Beaver Creek Fire up in northern Colorado that were some of these really long duration fires. So really it's interesting that Carrie had his talk, and quite frankly, he touched on a lot of the topics that I was interested in, and I had taken back to my kind of leadership within the Weather Service and said, hey, you know, our jobs, our roles are changing. How do we as IMET stay relevant? How do we keep training ourselves? How do we make ourselves available as the world is changing with technology and FS Pro and long-term analysts and the different tools that are out there and the different tools that the crews carry with them, meaning everyone has their iPhone and your morning IAP can become outdated in a couple hours. But in today's world, just like anybody can get their point and click information, so can a lot of the crews on the line, assuming they have you know, cell phone information. But so I'm hoping that a lot of the people on here are the analysts, because what I'm trying to think of or going through my mind is how our jobs and our roles have changed, and I think there's opportunities for all of us as long-term analysts and fire behavior analysts and the air resource advisors to kind of work together, and I think the Brannis Fire was an example of that. But I think we also want to take the opportunity to stand back and make sure that we're all supporting each other. And I think we are, but I think sometimes we're all not aware what each person can bring to the table. So kind of in the spirit of this, you know, Advanced Fire Learning Institute or unit, just to make sure that we each know what the other can bring. And I think a lot of that just comes through basic communication. You know, using the example with Carrie and the long-term analysts, for myself, I love working with the LTANs and diving into the data and giving that information. But I think it's incumbent on everybody who's out there, if you find yourself at an incident, maybe it's a type 2 team or something smaller or whatever the case may be, to make sure that you are speaking up and asking your IMET for input and asking what can you bring to the table, and if they're not bringing that to you, that you kind of clearly identify that. You know, and one of the talking points is that some of the notes that I've written down here is during the Brannis, it obviously did get pretty hectic with our morning cycles with the strategic operations planner, and these are things that are somewhat new for the IMETs to be dealing with, and perhaps for all of us to be dealing with. And so I think that it's not necessarily challenges, but opportunities to make sure that we're all on the same page. I can only speak more so to California, but it you know, a couple of years ago, we would always, you know, write 2 IAPs and have a day planning meeting and a night planning meeting, and at least with the federal incidents, and that culture has seemed to have changed a little bit, where we're reassessing our workload and how we're doing our stuff. So I think the same things can happen with how we all get together and share information. And I think some of you, I'm sure, on this call have heard different talk about having, you know, an intelligence section or a fire behavior officer, and that type of discussion, where we really make sure we're all working together and sending home the same message. So I guess using the Brannis as an example would be where that strategic operations planner working for the line officers or whatever, that their message is in coordination with what the short, medium, and long range weather suggests, that the long-term analyst, that their output is consistent with that message, and then of course the fire behavior analyst, you know, both, you know, the short term and you know, the next day or so, that we're all speaking the same message. And then quite frankly, you know, this was the first time I'd worked with air resource advisors before, but this one, we worked with air resource advisors for 90 days. And so that brought a new element to the table within the group. And I'm sure that we've all been on incidents where we kind of get divided up, where you have an LTAN down in this corner of another trailer hunkered away, and you know, fire behavior analyst who's working out of his home office or whatever. And I think it's really important as there's more and more of these intelligence type people, that you can't replace face-to-face interactions and meetings. And I know on that Brannis, and I'm pretty sure Tim's listening too, and we, you know, early on we were in a pretty small trailer, and with Carrie and Jennifer and the air resource advisors, and we were reaching maximum capacity, but it was important that we stayed together as a unit to kind of share all that information. So those are just some general thoughts that I had, but I guess right now I view this as an opportunity for the people who I think are listening as an opportunity to ask questions of me as an IMET, on behalf of the program, of the different things that we can bring to the table, because I think in my discussions with my fellow IMETs is sometimes we feel like we can be an underutilized resource as well, that we're there to help you and bring the different skill sets to the table, and it gets outside of this call, but with the public information officers and quite frankly even at times to be more embedded within operations where we're able to give them more of the short-term analysis and that type of thing. And that did end up happening by the end of the Brannis, and I can't even remember exactly when, late August through September, where at one point we reached, I think, about 5 IMETs on the fire, and that was for the most part a new paradigm that we hadn't done before, where we actually had on the west side of the fire on the coast and on the east side, where we had IMETs that were out there specifically just kind of embedded with operations, and they were only there focusing on a couple of the key divisions, and then back at the main ICP, or you could almost consider it a mini area command, those IMETs were doing more of the cooperators meeting, the IP component. So we changed some of our thinking and how we handled our business just due to travel times and spike camps and that type of thing. So I think it was a unique fire that brought, like I said, a lot of challenges, but also a lot of opportunities to the table. So I'm trying to, give me a second here while I'm just kind of looking through my notes here for the, yeah, and I guess, and I'm not sure if it reaches this target group or not, but again, with the air resource advisors, that was an interesting, and as much of this fire was burning in the wilderness, of course, the smoke was impacting high value communities, shutting down the school district due to the smoke impacts and, billion-dollar car shows and stuff like that. So suddenly, as Carrie alluded to, we were kind of pulled in different directions between, dealing with a burn operation, a night operation, what's our 3 to 5 day window, what's our 2-week window, what's our 1 month window. So it can be kind of you kind of get pulled in different directions, and like everybody else on the incident, you're dealing with exhaustion and everything like that. And now a unique thing on a fire like this and the coast, where generally we're not dealing with any type of convective weather, we're not worried about thunderstorms. If you would throw that into the mix, you would really kind of be pushing the limits. We all kind of bring our own agendas and biases to the table, but one of the things that came out of this for me was that I think for the weather services, we need to look at more times at having multiple IMETs on an incident where you can kind of following some of the fire behavior analyst thing, where you almost have a field IMET who's out in the field kind of observing the fire and the wind and that type of thing, and then that person who's kind of back at camp dealing with the logistics and that type of thing. Just like that, you might have a couple plan sections chiefs or sit unit leaders or that type of thing. So, and again, realize that for us as meteorologists, we're coming in almost always, of course, we're a single resource. We're not tied to the team. We work for a complete different agency within the Department of Commerce. Although our mission is saving lives and property, so we're not necessarily embedded in the culture the way that you guys are. So we're always trying to assimilate and help out, of course, in any way we can. But some of the cultural things that where we need help, I guess, or guidance perhaps at times. And so if you are that long-term analyst or fire behavior analyst, and it's a new IMET who's coming in from a different part of the country or a different state, to make sure that your directions or what you're expecting out of them are clear. And if it's, the YELTAN saying, hey, we need to meet every day from 10 to 10:30 to kind of go over some of the inputs, because I think you'll get a value-added impact if you give them a clear direction. And just like every IC or plans chief or or analyst has a different skill set. Of course, every IMET's going to have a different skill set. But if it's possible, are there any questions? Or I'd really like to encourage, I don't like to sit and listen to myself talk. I'd love to talk specifics about the Brannis Fire, or if anybody else has anything else that comes to the table, but where the IMET can help out, questions that you have of what we can or cannot provide, what you see for us in the future, times where maybe an IMET has failed you, I don't know. So just some things to throw out there while I kind of take a drink of water here and catch my breath.
Well, Ryan, this is Dan Mindar, and Diane had to step out, so I'm going to be finishing up with the moderation. But I can think of several instances where the IMET was used in somewhat unique way. I can see during burnout operations, I can think of an instance where the IMET was in operation pocket for several days during burnout operations. I can also think of an instance because of information that the fire information officers had shared with the public about, when we get these conditions, these things will happen. That the fire information officers were regularly hitting up the IMET for information. So I can think of a lot of different ways the IMETs are used on fires.
Right, and that definitely was happening with the Brannis, and again, I think I can speak for most of the people in the program. They're gonna, I would say 9 times out of the 10, they're gonna want to be involved, in handling those public meetings, the media interviews, helping to give the inputs to the analysts for, the scenario that Carrie kind of went through, and some of the L10 inputs there to make sure that we're all producing the best, possible product, and that we're all on the same page. I think that's kind of part of the angle that I'm getting at is kind of all of us working together as a team, the different intelligence, analysts, and just working together as a team to produce the best product for the incident management team and the public as a whole. And I think there's always room for improvement on that, and making sure we're all in the same trailer and talking, and maybe even sometimes they'll have a planning section meeting where everybody gets to give their input, or perhaps even at a smaller level, or within our unit. When it gets bigger, on a typical fire, if it's just an IMET and a fire behavior analyst, obviously you have plenty of one-on-one time where you can bounce ideas off of each other. But using the Brannis, and I'm sure other fires from this past season as an example, where that intelligence unit got so big, where you kind of could become fractured just due to travel times and stuff like that.
Okay, it looks like we've got one hand raised. Tobin, Tammy, you want to unmute him and let him go ahead and ask his question?
Yep, I'm trying to unmute him, but there was no pin to click or send. Yeah, Tobin, I can't get you to unmute. Can you maybe type your question in? In the meantime, while we're trying to get Tobin to, if we can figure out how to get him unmuted, we have a couple questions in the question box. One was from Jeff Shelton. With the number of exceptionally talented analysts in play, how often do differences of opinion surface? Hello? Hello? Hello?
All right, can you hear me now? Yeah, this is Ryan.
Yes.
Can you hear me now? All right,
yeah
you guys had me. That was a bad sign when you had muted me. No, Jeff's question. I think Jeff's question was about differences of opinion with bringing different people to the door, and I think obviously human dynamics I think there's a lot of proud people on this phone call, and it's normal. We all kind of feel each other out and ask people what's their experience, where are you from. You know, Carrie walked in from Colorado, and I thought, huh? That's a joke. But so yeah, I think that's a learning curve for all of us, and even within the IMET program too, when you bring in multiple people, and we're all, of course, checking each other's experience. But that's where getting together and building the relationships and the trust, bringing in good trainees and giving them a good qualified experience, it helps with that. So I think that's something that we all have to work on. It's a small community. I think we recognize a lot of each other's names, through different groups that were on committees, that type of thing. So it's a small family. That's a part of the dynamic that comes into play, and I'd be interested in other people's input on that.
Great, thanks, Ryan. We have another question from Risa Lang Navarro. One thing that came up at the IMET workshop in Boise this past March is how to get the National Weather Service to buy into standards for IMETs going out in the field and not just there at ICP. The thought was more on the physical fitness levels as compared to the brain levels. I would love to have a field IMET on fires to help get info back into ICP. As an F-band, I can only cover so much.
Yeah, and again with this is Ryan again, and I think we were able to really test that later in the incident, where, as Carrie alluded, I think when he and I were working together, that was it. I think I had a trainee, but later on, we did, as the thing became more and more spread out, and we had, I believe, 4 qualified IMETs at one point, and 2 of them were essentially what we at least anecdotally called them field IMETs. They were really just there for the key burning along the North Coast Ridge Road as they dragged fire down the line, and then we had another guy embedded over on the east side. He had no obligations to write a forecast. He carried the radio with him, and he literally was with the operations or the branch director for that branch, and with that person essentially in the truck all day, gathering intelligence. And that's one thing, a point that I'd like to make is, and even within our own agency, we've had these questions of, well, can we support the incidents from the office? And I give a strong no on that. The amount of intelligence that is picked up within the trailers and understanding what the goals of the team or the forest are is invaluable, and it's really important to keep your IMET engaged, share the water cooler talk, let them be a part of it and assimilate, and they will then be able to pick up on what is the key information. And so that this concept of a field IMET, I think is something worth exploring deeper, and it's, quite frankly, I think it's a route our agency wants to go in terms of being more involved in these types of incidents. And I think the second half of the Sobranis, we without realizing it, we kind of tested that theory.
Great, thanks, Ryan. What were events, this one is from Boyd Labita, what were the events or thresholds that prompted ordering additional IMETs for the Sobranis?
Yeah, so real quickly, I think on Carrie's map that he showed up there, like earlier on August 7th or so the actual first week or 10 days when it did its really intense burning, that was in areas that did not have fire history on the state responsibility area. So that's when it made its, I think maybe the first 35,000 acres or so were roughly on the state land with pretty intense burning where there was an area of no fire history. And then once it hit wilderness boundaries, and different strategies and tactics and had to be kind of employed then, as the fire moved into the wilderness, that changed things. And we ended up, because the original camp was, for lack of a better, up near Salinas, travel times became a big issue. And one of the breaking points when we went to the multiple IMETs was what was originally kind of a spike camp down in Big Sur turned into a full-fledged camp with night operations. Of course, they were trying to burn at night with the down canyons that showed up on that H3 RAWs. And it was physically impossible. There were so many public meetings that were going on, community meetings. And so we were being asked to be at a 6 o'clock planning meeting, a 6 o'clock community meeting, and a 6 o'clock night briefing, all at 3 different locations, which of course was unsustainable, given long travel times and everything else. So that was one of the key breaking points. And at least what we think we've figured out is really that the teams don't have a problem with bringing in additional IMETs. We just kind of have to break through some of the barriers, I think, within the culture of our own agency.
Okay, great. Thanks, Ryan. We have another question from Risa Lang-Navarro. On another note, have you used the mobile application developed by the University of Montana, the Landscape Fire Analysis Group, that allows crews to input weather data and send it to the IMET, as well as being archived at the University of Montana for future reference? It's listed within the app stores on both Google and Apple as the Fire Weather Calculator, and this app was developed by Jim Rittering, and it is a very useful application. Ryan, do you use that, or is that information shared amongst the IMET working group?
I can tell you again on the Brannis, actually, I think at the peak we had about 40 field observers or FOBs right around August 10th or so, and they were using that, and that was huge for us because even though it was in the wilderness where most of them were hiking around, was on the ridge lines, and they had cell reception, and then that's when some of the initial burnouts and whatnot were planned. They would use that, and we would immediately get that back. I gave them my email, or the different analysts, they all had our emails. They would send that, and we were able to plot that in Google Earth, and that was a great app. That quite frankly, this summer was the first summer I used it, and I know chatting with other IMETs, I can't say all of them, but that folks use that, and the field observers, it's easy, and it gave great intelligence rather than having them bring that back to the field or back into the trailer at night with a dirty piece of paper or whatever. So yes, we did use that, and I'm sure other people in the trailer appreciated that as well. But that's a great app for sure.
That's really great information to have as your feedback, and if others have used that, I would encourage you to pass that on to Jim Rittering at the center, so perhaps we can get it a little bit more formalized.
Okay, yeah.
One more. Okay, great. Thanks, Ryan. We have another question from Tobin, since I couldn't unmute him earlier. His question is, the Kirk complex in 99 seemed to display similar effects with the marine layer and interior valley conditions. Was there much data or personal communication with folks who were on that fire with the Brannis? This gets at the question is, how do we keep historical knowledge available?
I mean, the answer is anecdotally. I mean, of course, a lot of people that in 99 were on the Kirk were now, later in their careers. And of course, a lot of people had been there. So the Kirk in 99 and the Basin and now this fire, they more or less used the same footprint, the same lines, and then the 1977 Marble Cone. So, anecdotally, a lot of the same stories are there, the same information, the stories about the marine layer depth, and how that influenced fire behavior. I mean, we see that on our coastal fires. So, I know at least within the IMET program, we've, made a concerted effort in the last 10 to 15 years where, our logs and our weather files, we do archive so that when the next IMET shows up, the Basin was only in 2008, so it was only 8 years later, and we pull up, the logs and the files. And I think and for the record, going back to Carrie's talk, those IRODs, 7 of the 8 are still deployed. The forest has gotten an agreement to keep them up through March 15th so we can monitor for debris flows. But those IRODs, that information is out there, and quite frankly, I believe the San Jose State Group is going to be looking a lot at that for some research on the incredible drying that goes on above the marine layer. So that's hopefully one way where we can get some of that past information. But yeah, I think we all know those anecdotal stories in the local fire history, but it's a different animal to have it archived. And now maybe with some of the FS Pro stuff or the WFDA stuff, where some of this stuff is you can bring up some of the past fires and the fire growth days and that type of thing.
Okay, thanks, Ryan. That's the last of the questions that I see in the queue at this point. Dan, I'll turn it over to you for a few seconds. Dan? Dan, are you there?
Hey, Tammy, we may just have to skip his closing remarks. Just go through the...
So hopefully you guys can see up on my screen, we have the recorded products and survey. Before I jump into that, I just want to thank all of the speakers, Zeke and Carrie and Ryan. Thank you so much for your time and being willing to share some of your lessons learned and some of your tips and tricks or the things that you're working on. We did record this webinar. We're going to host it up on this website here for the Advanced Fire Environment Lessons Unit. It is on the NWCG website. The information that we shared up there last year is posted. We had 3 webinars that we cut apart, and they're YouTube videos. The thought process on this is we will break this apart as well, so there'll be 3 different webinars based on the topics that will be hosted on this site and likely in a YouTube type video fashion. Within the GoToMeeting webinar, or the GoToWebinar, that you'll get a thank you note that comes out from, I think it comes out with my name on it, or it might be Lisa Aylin's. Thank you for attending. But it'll have a survey within that, and we would really appreciate your survey feedback based on the content, were the topics relevant, and if you'd be willing to participate in future webinars, and then also if you have additional comments or topics that you would like us to consider, we would really appreciate that support. So thank you very much, and we will go ahead and close this webinar. Thank you for your time.
Thanks.